Spalding, possibly Michelle Stennett. They will be coming to give us kind of an update about what's been going on in the state legislature, things that we should be aware of. Another thing to keep in mind is there is a day of action for Medicaid expansion on February 4th. I know that there's a group of folks heading over to go over, meet with legislators, and do some actual stuff under the dome on the 4th, but they're heading over on the 3rd. You can talk to Claudia. She's back there. Wave, Claudia. Also, I believe Claudia has a letter you can sign. Yep, there's a sign-up sheet, a letter that you can sign over there, letting our legislators know you want them to implement Medicaid as passed. Yes.
And we have easy 2-page instructions on how you can submit a short emailed written testimony to the Joint Health and Welfare Committee hearings next Friday.
Okay, great. So yes, we'll be doing committee hearings next Friday, so we'll have instructions for that. So you can talk to Claudia after this meeting. Also, to keep in mind is that, hey you guys, it's an election year. Every year is an election year. If you are interested in what positions are up, so like there's some auditorium district positions up, there's some school board positions up, there's some cemetery district positions up, there's some city council positions up. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know. I have a list of due dates and filing dates, as well as positions that are open. Yes, Claudia?
Don't forget, we have a school bond election coming up in March.
Yes.
Second Tuesday. It's a very easy election, and our county election supervisor, Brendan Pruden, is desperately looking for people who are willing to get a little honorarium for working elections, and that's an easy one.
Yeah, and we'll have information going out about that as well. So our democracy, the safety of our democracy, thrives on an informed, engaged citizenry. I don't care what party you are. What I care about is that more citizens are informed and that more citizens are engaged, because we have a huge problem where when we're not paying attention, that is how we lose our democracy. And it doesn't matter what party you belong to, whether you belong to no party at all. The key is to be informed and engaged. So the more people we have engaged, the better off we'll be. All right, so I will step down off of my soapbox. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. And now let's turn it over to Rob Thornberry, Idaho's field representative for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. So thank you so much, Rob.
I know some of you. I'll introduce myself to the rest of you. Rob Thornberry. I moved to eastern Idaho in 1990. My goal was to live here 2 years and move to Alaska. Then I met a girl. And I think that's a case that happens to a lot of guys in eastern Idaho. The other thing I met, though, at the same time was the public lands here. I came for a newspaper job. I was the editor at the paper for almost 25 years. Well, actually just a little over 25. And then I was too expensive and they let me go. So I fell into this job, stumbled into this job, which is the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Our goal is to amplify the voice of sportsmen in federal land planning. It's perfect for me because I love to hunt and fish and I love the outdoors. So for the last 3 years and 1 day, I have been working for these guys. Let me stop here. This is a disclaimer about my discussion. This isn't a history lesson. This isn't a complete history of the West. This presentation is my pursuit of the answer to one question. How did we get to the point that a group of people wants to give away our public lands to the states? So that's where I'm coming from on this, and I want you guys to know I'm not trying to be cut and dry. I am an absolute avid user of public resources, and I think giving them away to the States would be one of the biggest mistakes we could make. So I just want you to know you're not going to get an objective talk. You're going to get a cheerleader. I floated the Middle Fork 9 times, including 3 with Matt here. The Main 6 times, the Grand Canyon twice. I've hunted and fished in 15 units in Idaho. I've climbed Diamond, I've climbed Table Mountain, I've climbed Bora. It's the reason I stayed here was a pretty girl and public lands. All right. Fire questions away when you want. If I'm not making sense, I'm going too fast. Matt's giving instructions to slow me down. All right, so I figure we'd start our discussion by celebrating the Republic. Wow. Theodore Roosevelt, who I like to tell people I work for, those are his bona fides. And he's at a crux point of the history of the West, and I just I wanted to bring him up and show kind of what TRCP is working toward. It's important to remember with Theodore Roosevelt is he was a pragmatist, he was a cattle rancher, and he was a speculator, and he was a hunter. So when he saw the West, he has a reputation of being a conservationist and a preservationist. But if you go back and read what he talked about, he wasn't any of those things. He was for the use of the West, but he was for the smart use of the West. When he talked about bird preserves, it wasn't to preserve birds, it was to preserve birds to be shot at later by hunters. Same with the forests, same with the national parks. So just remember as I talk, when we talk about him, he is a conservationist, don't get me wrong, but he was more of a pragmatist than most people give him credit for. He's also terrible on women's issues, but we'll talk about that another day. Importance of public lands. I'm assuming everybody can read that. I'll try not to just read through these, but this is kind of my recreation summary, this last one. What I want people to get out of this slide is recreation is an economy in Idaho. It's an economy in every state of the West. You go to the Black Hills, it's all tourism related. It's all people that are using the natural resources. How that's tangible in Idaho Falls is there's some youngster who learned Mandarin growing up who has a job during the summers because of tourism, because of recreation. I stand up here as an advocate for hunters and anglers, but it's important for me to point out that this economy isn't just hunting and fishing. It's rock climbing, it's river rafting, it's riding motorcycles, spelunking. It's anything and everything. Cave exploring, sorry. Any questions?
Ron, does that figure then include the increasingly popular sports of outdoor viewing, photography, bird watching,
It takes in every measure, from the sale of bird feed to the sale of a $77,000 RV. And it can be tied to the use of outdoor recreation. And that's generally how the government defines it, is fairly broadly.
What percentage of that is spelunking?
I think there's like 4, and I think Matt's one of them. You're a spelunker, aren't you?
Previously.
In an older life.
Thank you.
Any other questions? My point here is, what I try to tell people with this slide is, too often outdoor communities butt heads. Recreation, motorized recreation and archery hunters don't get along when they're in the woods. They want different experiences. And that's just everybody wants what they want and was. But we've got to think larger than that, and we've got to think as a community of public land owners who are vested in it. So when you think of the economy, make sure that you think of ATVs and RVs and bird feed and binoculars, not just guns and ammo. Yes?
6.3 billion strikes me as a very comfortable number. These people who want to mine and build dams and do all the other things and take it or sell the land for development and so on, are they not impressed by that?
They are impressed, but we're also in a agrarian economy here, where their number, that recreation number's a big number until you put it next to farming.
Tourism is number 3, is the number 3
Right,
industry.
and a fraction, and maybe half as much as farming. So that's how it's sort of pigeonholed. The other way it's pigeonholed is that people say the 77,000 jobs isn't high-paying jobs. That's how they'll tailor down that slide. They'll say, oh, it's part-time river guys.
But the farm-
Yeah, it is. That's because that's what those kids want. That's how they want to live. They're living the damn dream. They're smart enough not to go get real jobs behind desks.
And there are a whole bunch of visas given for foreign students to come in and work the park.
Well, that's a whole different issue. I'm not going to go down that one. Did I answer your question?
Well, just not quite. So they compare it to farming. The people who want to sell the lands compare it to farming, but they don't want to farm those lands.
They want, in some cases they do. What they wanted, the argument for state control is simple. We can make more money with it. Which is true. In the immediate short term, they can.
Very short term.
And then they've got nothing to take care of. They haven't. But we're jumping ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe you're gonna cover this. You talked about selling land, you talked about selling public land. What does it take for the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Interior to sell public land? What's the requirement?
It depends on the public lands.
Repeat the question.
What's that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
What are the requirements that the government has to go through to sell public lands? I'm going to use BLM as an example. I can give you my thought. We can go down a rabbit hole on that one, and I don't want to get too far out in the weeds. BLM has to, every BLM unit, field office has to keep an inventory of lands for disposal. By law, flip them. They have to keep an inventory of lands that they're going to sell. So the states, so BLM is set up to give away land. This week in Chalice, Idaho, they gave away like 600 acres. It's going to be a part of a recreation facility. It's going to be part of a ATV trail. It's going to be part of, I think, their sewage facility. There's a natural way to transfer public lands to cities, and it's being done. To give away in federal lands currently, beyond that, I don't know what protocols are.
Are there any more homesteads?
It's funny you ask. The Homestead Act is gone, but currently in Alaska, Murkowski, Representative Murkowski, Senator, is pushing for a modification of Homestead. The last one, technically under the Homestead Act, is like 1985, but there may be some in the future.
I think the biggest thing with my question is with state land transfer, because that's the big deal here, right? State land transfer. So the mechanism for that would be the federal government to return their holdings to the state of Idaho. But the issue is really, could you talk about the mechanisms in which the state of Idaho, under its constitution, did not run a deficit on public lands?
Ask me that question in about 5 slides.
All right.
This is an eager group. Right? I'm laying out this winding path how we got there, and everybody's like, all right, let's talk about being there. Okay, slow down. Manifest destiny. Who's aware of manifest destiny? The idea that we were going to get rid of the European influences on the North American continent, and we were going to take it over and use it. So I want to start there, and then I just want to break down how that sort of played out in the West, and it will get to the questions of land ownership. So we started out, first act. Buy, acquire, conquer, conquer. Our history, up until the Civil War, before the Civil War, was adding country. And included how to get rid of that country. The idea is if we can plow it all into submission, we're going to be the greatest country in the world. That's the age that we went through. Primary way that happened was the Homestead Act. 160 acres, cultivated for 5 years, show improvements, it's yours. Think of the eastern boundary of Kansas. The Homestead Act worked perfectly right up until there. From there west, it didn't work for a variety of reasons. But the numbers, Wallace Stegner's book on John Wesley Powell has the numbers of failures. Basically, people were being lured out into the West and in droves had to leave within 3 years. Then what happened is the land speculators picked up the land and tried to turn it around. So, since the Homestead Act didn't quite work as well, the government worked its way through other ways to get people to go west, conquer, manifest destiny. Right? Let me check my notes. Let me go back one slide, I'm sorry. Is everybody doing all right, or am I going too slow? So, in this period of expansion west, you always had speculators. You always had guys that wanted to get rich quick. Same as in today's society. There's people who it's about money, and there's people who it's not quite about money. This is William Gilpin, first territorial governor of Idaho, or Colorado, sorry. He was a land speculator, and he owned papers. He dabbled in everything. He was pretty genius. He wrote stories and commissioned art in the celebration of Colorado being where everybody could make their fortune. So there are these utopian photos of springs and babbling brooks and deer and elk and speculators. Remember William Gilpin. I jumped ahead of myself. So, we go through the period, we're still trying to homestead the West. The Homestead Act doesn't work, the government tries to adapt. And we get to this idea of overuse. Most popularly argued by Theodore Roosevelt in his 2 trips to South Dakota. The first trip, the world was full of game and everything. The second trip, there was nothing. Game was being hunted out. And he came to the idea that, we had a finite resource in the West and that we needed to take care of it. And this is what I call the yin and yang part. Up until this point in the West, it had largely been no holds barred, get rid of it, sell it, till it, mine it, do whatever. And this is the point where there's sort of a consciousness towards slowing down and taking care of it and knowing that we were going to run out. So during this time, protectionism, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, National Forest, Antiquities Act, trying to protect. The yin and yang concept is that even under Roosevelt, the idea was to use it. It wasn't to preserve it, it wasn't to set it aside. The vast majority of public lands were to be worked. So you had this yin and yang of people who wanted to protect the treasures and the speculators like Gilpin. And the famous story in Yellowstone is people setting up flop houses at the edge of the park, on the way to the park. And the idea that Yellowstone would be ruined by carnies is what got people in action. So again, just the idea of yin and yang, exploitation, use, preservation. So now we get into our time. Well, more protectionism, more regulation, more trying to take care of the resources. Clean Water Act. You know who the most influential environmental president of our lifetimes is? Trivia question.
Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon. Blows me away, but it's a different story. This is the birth, and I shouldn't say birth, I should say rebirth. This is the rebirth of the Sagebrush Rebellion. The people who believe in the philosophy of this was ours, it was given to us to use, conquer, manifest destiny. Got tired of all of this. Got tired of all of this protectionism. And that sprung to life in fighting over roads in Northwest, Northeast, North Nevada. And then I think the precipitating event that crystallized everything was President Bill Clinton from the Grand Canyon in Arizona signed a proclamation for Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. I could argue probably his dumbest mistake, but probably not even in his top 10, but a truly bad mistake on his part, because he riled up the people in the Sagebrush Rebellion, and they have focused their attention since then on the idea of it's underused and we gotta sell it. And that act, I would argue, galvanized much of what we're feeling today. Now I will stop the questions.
What would have been the alternative to that? Because a lot of people do argue that that land is, worthy of preservation.
Absolutely gorgeous.
And management.
One of the greatest places in the country. Utah is speckled with just gorgeous places. How would I have done it? How should they have done it? How the Owyhees in Idaho were created. A small group of people got together. There's 1.9 million acres of wilderness in the Owyhees, and two guys, Rick Johnson and Craig Gertrude, went to all 27 landowners in the Owyhees and hammered out a deal one by one. And they got a wilderness out of it that the entire state supports. Monuments are a top-down decision. The president stands on high, points his finger, and makes it so. That riles up Westerners. Who all was born in the West. Didn't it rile you up when presidents do something like that? So how I would have done it is build it up from the ground.
Depends on how it's done. I think the reality is, however you get protection these days, that's the right way to go, because you really can't put a price on the value of public lands. There's spiritual value, there's a there's an intrinsic value to them that isn't being pushed enough with your approach. You know, it's not all about economics. It's about protection. We're smarter than the TR was in the 1900s, when it was about preserving for killing the birds in the future. We know that there is a value for each and every one of us just to go for a hike, not to shoot anything. And so I think that looking at the value over time of public lands instead of the short-term profit is the way we need to go, and then factor in the intrinsic value of public lands. And so if there is a top-down decision with Escalante by President Clinton or something like that happens in the future, then what you do is figure out after the fact how to incorporate other interests to satisfy those concerns. But we've got to go toward protection because of the overuse that is happening. I think we're at a tipping point now on public lands where we just can't afford to lose any more.
I think you and I could debate a lot of that for days and days. Where I want to stop is, I agree with you. There is intrinsic value, there is health value, there is environmental value, there is Rob Thornberry's sanity value. When I go around Tower Rock on the Salmon River, and my phone turns from a computer to a paperweight. I'm totally with you on that. What I argue is, what I want to return you to is, remember, this was all about answering the question, how did we get to the point of people arguing that state control is better? And that's how I think we got here. That's how I think we, again, I'm not an expert. I'm sure there's somebody in the room that's better in tune with Western history than I am. But to answer that question, this last little bit, these are all wonderful things. This is probably one of the best that we've done. These are all wonderful things, but we've still got a multiple use mandate on public lands. And the idea of sustainable yields. And we have to, as a group, recreationalists, I'm sort of spinning here, but we as a group of recreationalists have to make the economic argument, which will help us preserve the intrinsic benefits.
Do national monuments have an entry fee and things like that?
It depends on the national monument. So, interesting about BLM is sort of the leftover land. The Forest Service picked all of the stuff that had timber on it, went to Department of Ag. All the wetlands and marshes, animal values, clean water values, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Then the whole chunk of the West, desert, where you can grow sagebrush and, you know, it's not, you can't, you have to have very specific ways to farm it to succeed. It's always lived under that general use ethic, use it. Escalante changed the game because it was the first BLM land that was designated special. First BLM land that was elevated above the rest of the BLM land as a national monument. They've done things like little areas for species of critical concern, but this was the first time that BLM had entered the fray. And BLM's main customers up until that point are ranchers. Teddy Roosevelt, rancher. They have a claim to the West. They have a claim, and we've got to honor that, and we've got to work with them and help them succeed. I'm speaking specifically as a hunter here. because they take care of the game at least part of the year. Whoops, I went one too far.
Rob,
Yes.
I have a question about the mining. You showed the initial law of 1872,
Right.
and the second one 1920,
Yeah.
regarding mining of mineral claims.
Mm-hmm.
Does that, what's the limitations on somebody declaring a claim on a mine?
I don't know the answer to that. The reason I showed that was the idea of using it. The Homestead Act doesn't work west of the 100th meridian. So so you've learned that the Homestead Act's not gonna work. So what do? Well, one is Taylor Grazing Act. One is the Desert Land Act. And another is mining, changing the mining laws, changing who can apply, when they can apply. So one of the issues is...
That's what populated Idaho.
Yeah. And again, that was part of the speculator's dream. Every gold rush was a speculator's dream. We're gonna go up Corn Creek and we're gonna make $1 million.
We call it boomers.
Yeah, and you come out 5 years later, 20 pounds lighter, going, California, we're gonna make it in California. Alaska. Threats and opportunities on public.
Rob, how did Bureau of Land Management get, put in with the Department of Agriculture? And what?
It's not with the Department of Agriculture.
It's not now?
But it's Department of Interior.
BLM is Department of Interior.
What's with Interior?
Agriculture was basically everything green. BLM was all brown shit. Sorry, I shouldn't say that.
National Park Service, is that interior?
Yep. Interior is basically everything that was left over. BLM being the stuff that was at the lowest priority.
What you're saying, that's the unharvestable land.
Right. What is the expression? Plow follows the rain, or rain follows the plow, or...
So you got your threats and opportunity slides here. Before we move on, could you give us a brief overview on a couple of things?
Sure.
The first would be, so you have the Antiquities Act that established Grand Staircase, Escalante, and Bears here. And in the past couple of years, the Antiquities Act has been used to reduce those monuments, to hand them back to the BLM. But I think is a misconception among most people that that land was given to private interests, where it in fact was given back to the federal government under a different management structure. Could you give us a quick overview on how that currently is playing out?
So I'll use Bears Ears as your primary example. Bears Ears created Obama 1.3 million acres. So at its original size, it had protections, and the monument status is largely used for Indian artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
You go up in there and you close your eyes, turn a circle, turn around, you're gonna find something. It's just rich. Well, the reason it was shrunk and put back to general management is there's some uranium mining claims to the west.
Mm-hmm.
So by taking the monument designation and shrinking it, they're keeping those
You're opening opportunities
for
future
uranium mining, which had been dead
Mhm.
under the monument.
So is there any new developments on how that's playing out in court?
No, it's tied up in the courts, it's tied up in
Okay.
BLM.
My second question is with the Land and Water Conservation Fund,
Mhm.
which was expired in September of 18.
Mhm.
Has that been reauthorized?
No, and we're hoping to get that kick-started this week. Land and Water Conservation Fund, a tax on offshore drilling that goes to purchase recreation access, golf courses, city parks, one of the great conservation tools in this country. If you don't do anything else after you leave here, go back and email your representatives and say, properly fund land and water conservation. I'll get off my soapbox now. Okay, let me stop here because there was one question Matt had earlier. When the states joined the union, they signed over all the federal land, basically all the unclaimed land at that point in time. And that is what became the Forest Service of BLM. In exchange for that, each state got 1 square mile per 10 square miles. I don't remember the formula, but it's state land. And that was given over to the state at that point in time. In all states, not all, in most states, including Idaho, that land is managed for profit.
That's not public land, that is owned by the state of Idaho, not
Some
by
of it is. It's not technically public land, it's state land. And if they want to sell it for 36 cents on the dollar, they can do it.
Yeah.
The idea being a way to help rural economies and promote growth of schools.
They aren't most states actually doing that, selling the land?
Yes.
off?
And they should be. The point here being, under federal control, there's a mechanism to dispose of the worst of the public lands to help communities like Chalice. If you went to state land board model of state ownership, it's for profit.
And that's in our constitution, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Is the land leased to timber companies available for public right of way or not?
It currently is, but that's one of the concerns going forward is that a lot of the deals in this country for access, for example, were handshake deals. Antelope Creek Road, for people who've been here a while, ran across private ground up into the corner of the forest. County had an agreement, a handshake agreement with the landowner. When the land was sold, the county still thought they had public access, the new owners did. One of the biggest threats coming around the bend for us. All the access to, a lot of the access to undiscovered parts of this public land in this state and at mining claims and at private property. And if those guys don't honor easements that they've had handshake deals with the Forest Service and BLM, we could lose them and lose access. That's why, that's my number 2 concern. Questions? I'm almost done. Opportunities. There are ways to dispose of public lands. BLM, Forest Service have to keep roles of what is their least attractive. There's a beautiful thing going on in eastern Idaho, in Idaho Falls. BLM owns the water tower on Iona Hill. BLM owns a huge chunk of that. The Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation has approached them to build a mountain bike park up there.
Cool.
So all that has to happen is that BLM gives the land to the city, to Iona, I think, or the county maybe, I'm not sure. A way that public lands can be disposed of to help communities survive, to add to the intrinsic value of here. Wouldn't it be cool if we had really badass mountain bike park? I know this is a big crowd of mountain bikers, I'm sure. You know what I mean? It's a way to sell the city, sell the community to, here's my dream. I work from home, I telecommute. Why can't we have more telecommuters live in Idaho Falls? Our energy is cheap. The outdoors are cool. Wouldn't it be a benefit for the community? So don't our public lands, shouldn't we leverage that?
This might be related to more of a water issue. But I've heard in some states or places, people are somehow buying property on a river and then claiming that river that is their water rights. What's happening?
There's a couple of different things there. What I think you're talking about is stream access. Idaho is really pretty conservative when it comes to water management, but somebody along the way was really super awesome. And they decided that everything below the high water mark, the flood mark, down to the river is public ground. And you can access that. It's great for me. I love to fish, so it's great. I can go anywhere. I can go to a bridge if I want, lower my boat off, get in my boat, and be on public resource the whole time. What's happening is in Montana in particular,
Montana, I know that.
rich
Yellowstone.
rich is a word you go
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
often on that.
Yeah.
A rich man bought a bunch of the land on,
Gallatin?
I think so, and he wants to close it, he wants to change the law so that private property, in Wyoming, for example, private property goes under the river.
Jeez.
If you're in a boat, you're on public water, you get out of the boat, even standing in the river, you're on private property.
Same in Colorado, right?
Colorado's like a hybrid.
Yeah.
So we don't want to lose that. And that's my last thing, and I'm open for questions.
Just a comment. It did pass under Nixon. It was a Democratic Congress.
I'm glad to hear that. And just for full clarity, I'm a rhino.
Has that monument been reduced in size? Has that been officially done?
It is being litigated. The direction from the government, from the executive branch, is to shrink it. It's being litigated. There's some belief that that's not legal. The final thing I will say, I'm sure you hear this all from everybody that comes up and speaks in front of you. Get involved. We're in a period right now where it just get involved. Be loud. Be proud.
When BLM is looking at what land is disposable, do they take into account if it's a habitat area for species of concern?
Yes. One of the things that I really glossed over was in 76 or 77, Congress passed and the President signed Federal Land Management and Planning Guidance, FLIPMA.
No, finish your.
And it's red tape. It's that bonded red tape that you hear about. The argument from the speculators is that it strangles innovation and use. And I lost my train of thought.
Regulation generally stifles predation, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know. Regulation is the boogeyman in this argument.
Or the savior, one of the two.
Yeah.
Depends
Well,
on the
boogeyman
regulation.
from the speculators.
That's what I'm saying. It stops the speculator.
And as far as management and turning lands back to the states instead of the federal government, I mean, with climate change and fires, how are we going to be able to pay for that, take care of that?
Very, very good question. That's Butch Otter of all people. You guys know the famous Harley Reno debate where him and the pro-life and the other guy made fools of themselves and made Idaho look dumb?
Yep.
It still makes me mad.
Yep.
Shrewd political maneuvering by Otter to get that done. But in that debate, about the 2/3 mark of that debate, somebody asked him about transferring this public lands to the state. And he's on the record saying, yeah, that sounds great. How do we pay for it? One fire comes through, it's all ruined, we're bankrupt. Move on, this isn't a good idea. Butch Otter said that. And our new governor is even more is in the center from there.
And just a quick note on that, there's a really great documentary on PBS on American Experience called Big Bird. It's a wonderful show.
With the fairly recent threat to Harriman State Park, can you clarify, do you think that they were actually intending to go against the rules regarding it remaining public ownership so that they could sell it? Or was it just an oversight that they raised that threat at then is that threat gone?
With the Republicans in this state, no threat is gone. It's whack-a-mole. I believe that it was an oversight by people trying to simplify government, and they lumped Harriman in, and they didn't realize the tail of the tiger. And then the conservation groups got involved and screamed, "The sky is falling."
Right.
So I think everybody used that to their advantage. I think that speculators in this country, people who still believe in manifest destiny and all of its designs, still want to profit, and will still be looking for Wilkes Brothers. We'll still be looking for loopholes.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it came back.
I just yesterday read about, heard on the radio, a sale, mining or drilling in Wyoming,
Mhm.
For any of those sales, is there always a public comment period?
Yes. Again, going back to Flipma, there are a million ways to comment on these things. What he's talking about is that Wyoming is ahead of everybody on migration. They have researched, they have Wyoming Migration Initiative. If you want a website to go waste the rest of your Saturday. It's totally awesome. They have put together where deer are going, and they're trying to stop Wyoming and BLM from selling sections inside the migration. Pretty cool stuff. One of the most awesome things about Idaho, from my point of view, is we don't have oil and gas.
So, for the benefit of everybody in this room and then people watching online, can you give...
My mom and somebody else.
People watch later. You don't need to harsh my mellow there. Can you name the best avenues for which people can get involved? Besides just writing letters to the editor, like sustainable involvement. You mentioned a bunch the other day.
That's a great question. And it's going to be different from everybody. Greg and Colleen volunteered 100 million different things. That's an avenue. Commenting on federal land plans is an avenue. There are avenues for whatever fits how you want to do it. I'm on the internet, so if you want more ideas after that, but there's a ton of stuff that you can do.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking like organizations like there's the State Naturalist Society.
State Naturalist is awesome. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, the Mountain. One of the things that keeps me worried about the future is how much access we're losing to our wilderness, to the truly center of the intrinsic. Stoddard Pack Bridge is gone. It was knocked out by a landslide. It's gone. So you cannot, from the north side of the Brink Church, get in. On the Camas Creek side, they just lost 2.5 miles of canyon stretch. There's no money to rebuild it. At Loon Creek, they just had a slide. One of my worries about the speculators is that they tighten the screws down on BLM and Forest Service so much that they can't keep up with their maintenance, and the cry to sell it increases again.
So just a quick question on getting involved. Public lands are super expensive, and the management of them are expensive, right?
No.
No?
No.
So when we have things like Land and Water Conservation Fund, Hickman-Robertson Act, Dingell-Johnson Act, are there any talks of a future tax on other recreational goods to help foot the bill and gain more access?
Not in the Trump era. I think that idea is out there all the time. I think it's a great idea.
Because to me it seems like there's almost becoming two camps in the public use realm. You have your hunters and anglers, which have footed the bill for wildlife conservation and public access for a long time. and then your non-hunting and angling and your more recreationalist crowds. Is there any way to start talking about ways in which those two groups could come together to fund more access?
Both of those groups, it's not symbiosis, it's another type of relationship. Both motorized and non-motorized, hunters and non-hunters, we all benefit from each other. One of the things that I wish that we had, and this is why I'm Republican in name only, is I want a tax on my hiking boots. I know Department of Parks and Recreation has a motorized sticker. It pays for all the maintenance. They have money to give away. They're dying to spend money. I want that for hunters, hikers, non-motorized, silent users, to where when I go out on the trails, I have to buy a $32 hiking stamp, and that goes all to maintenance, trail maintenance.
Are there other, like in other countries, are there?
I don't.
Do you know if there
There's not
things
much.
like that?
Parks and Rec does a wonderful job on their programs that generate money, park and ski,
Okay.
stuff like that. There's no money that just goes along with hiking, so it's easy to overload.
And that was talking about global warming. Are you, as an advocate for public land protection, thinking long-term about what we can do to hold off global warming strategies? You know, if you believe in this, in the information we're getting, that it's 12 years out before we see some pretty apoplectic, some major changes. What about strategies to encourage behavior changes so that we have less chance of forest fires destroying our public lands?
We're involved in the climate change discussions. The main way that TRCP was involved was fixing the way fires are funded. Currently, fires are not like hurricanes. Hurricanes, they hit town, declare an emergency, federal government swings into action. Forest fires are budgeted out of the forest budget, and it's just been strangled. So we have worked with a lot of other organizations to get more FEMA money involved and less dependence on fire money. To answer the start of your question, when we talk about in federal land plans, the things that we're stressing towards global warming are how to combat the huge fires and cold water refugia. And when you say refugia, that's when most people generally go to sleep. But cold water refugia. As we get warmer, where are the animals and fish going to go? And the preservation is in the high country, and we'll see how that plays out. Are we specifically tied to it? No. Greg.
I was going to correct you on that. Ken Collette, not Greg.
Ken.
Now, just a couple of comments to Pat's earlier question. That's all right. One way you can support not just administration, set aside land, it's like Theodore Regional Land Trust works with local people and work with farmers, ranchers to turn over their property, and then later they work in conjunction with each other to preserve the property. It's a real effective way. It's a slow process, but it is a true effective long-term way of protecting land. But to the other comments that were made earlier, I believe this current administration is the only administration that's ever taken away public lands or any kind of has pulled back the landfall. Modern day presidents have signed usually in the last year, maybe more in the last year somewhere. But you've got to pay attention to what they are doing this time. Is everything right now to be like the Green Tetons? Because yes, there were people waiting in the wings for airmen to both mine and to develop it as a recreational area for fluid and take it away from basically the public. But in the Grand Tetons 5 years ago, Wyoming didn't ready to exercise its right to consume that part of the Grand Teton National Park that we all are familiar school and not take that land away. So we have 5 more years to go. If that situation that occurred 5 years ago under this 10-year agreement has occurred now, I can only imagine the possibility that we could have lost the prime heart of Grand Teton. And the Rockefellers that own the land between Grand Tetons and Yellowstone, most people don't understand why don't they just join that part of the park together. Wyoming also has first rights to that property. If the Rockefellers ever decide to get rid of it, that Wyoming, not the Department of Interior, the U.S. government of any sort, has first rights to absorb that property. So that's why the Rockefellers, who've been in litigation for almost 100 years now to get that taken off the books, so that Wyoming doesn't hold that over them, and that they would like to do is turn it over to make the park one continuous.
Get rid of those in holdings.
Right, but that's why they have to continue to hold on to that property as part of the family farm, so to speak, because if they ever try to get rid of it, Wyoming has first right steps. So you really have to pay attention to all the little agreements that were made 50, 60, 70, 100 years ago, and you're very concerned with who you elect to public office and what their intentions are.
And that's where the recreation community has the most voice. Again, I'm going to say the land transfer movement is a whack-a-mole. You're going to beat it down somewhere and it's going to pop up somewhere else in a dangerous different way. That dynamic in the West will be here long after I'm gone.
The speculator ethic is the most patriotic ethic we have.
Yep.
You talk about the importance of the access to the wilderness areas and trail maintenance and so on. I have heard of the Idaho Conservation League. I don't know exactly what they do. Are they involved in that trail maintenance stuff, or is there another organisation, or just the individual areas that are responsible for trail maintenance?
They're not specifically involved with that. What's happened is the federal government has been starved. Obama, Bush, Clinton, Trump certainly, with slim budgets. And what's happened is maintenance backlogs have risen in national parks to terrible levels. On wildernesses, it's even worse because the cost of rebuilding it, you have to do it in pre-1964 tools, non-motorized. So that's my concern on that is that we're just going to starve it to death, and we're going to lose a generation of advocates who aren't going to see the wilderness, who aren't going to understand what it is.
So what does the Idaho Conservation League?
Clean water, clean air, clean night skies. They're a great outfit. I'm not really studying them, but if that's somebody that you could look into.
Just want to add one other thing. Support your local government, like Idaho Fish and Game stuff, promoted when they come around and want to charge fees to birders and hikers. As much as we may not, well, I'm a birder and a hiker and as well, and while I may initially not want to pay that fee, statistics show for the last 10 years, everybody's depending on anglers and hunters to support wildlife and to support sustainable lands, which they have done for hundreds of years. Those numbers are plummeting for people who want to get into hunting or angling. There's not, that's one big concern that Fish and Game has, and all their numbers for licenses and stuff is just dropping year on year. Most of the people we have here in Idaho from out of state do it, but across the whole country, there's fewer and fewer hunters and anglers going out there. But there's a lot of resistance from people who just want to do birding, photography, and hiking to increase fees to them. They still want to continue to have anglers and hunters pay for everything, which is not fair, and we need to step up and be able to pay a fee or to get a card that allows us to go to Market Lake or Mud Lake or wherever, or the Tetons or whatever, to observe wildlife and photograph, because we are, if we want to preserve it, we have to step forward and do that, not just depend on those who've done it in the past.
But that fuels the narrative that all we want to do is tax it to save it. We've got to get out of that mindset. I personally believe that there should be user fees on everything. I'm all for that. But two caveats. One is, we've got to remember that everybody else, for the most part, that lives in the West, speculators aside, wants the same things that we do. They want the mountains. They want their kids to go to a good school. They want clean air. They want clean water. So just be involved. Just be involved and work with them. Let's not demonize me, demonize motorcycle riders or the rancher that's pounding something. Let's work together to fix it.
I got kind of like an off-the-topic question,
Okay.
but so I think it was a few months ago, the Trump administration under the new EPA administrator proposed to redefine navigable waters.
Yes.
The waters of the U.S. How is that progressing, and how does that change affect current policy as far as clean water goes?
It's progressing. The beautiful thing, and speculators and Republicans and folks who want to get rich will disagree with me, the most wonderful item of legislation was the FLIPMA. They've got to go through FLIPMA to get all of that done, and it just stops the regulations that are involved. So we have good rules in place, we've just got to be ready to defend those rules.
Oh, what was that name again?
FLIPMA.
I don't mean to wax political, but twice you've mentioned your Republican identity.
I'm not Republican.
Why did you say that you were a Rhino?
Republican in name only. It's
Well,
an inside
that
joke.
makes it sound like you identify as a Republican in name, even if you might not agree with them. How could you possibly?
My mother is just twitching right now.
Thank you.
I'm being a smart ass.
Smartass is okay. Republican isn't.
You gotta meet my mom. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for all coming. We love Republicans too, it's okay.
No.
All right, I love Republicans, it's okay. But anyway, thank you all so much for coming. I did double check the date of our next Central Committee meeting. It will be February 19th at 7 p.m. at the Public Library. So please come. Once again, Claudia's there at the back if you have questions about making sure that we the people have our law implemented as we voted for it. Go on back, talk to Claudia, sign the letter if we're so inclined. Thank you all so much for coming, and I hope to see you again very soon.
Thank you.